Yesterday, we arrested a 77-year-old Edmonds man. He's suspected of murdering 20-year-old Jody Loomis in 1972. His name is Terrence Miller.
In November 2020, a jury walked into a courtroom in Snohomish County, Washington. They had been listening for 2 weeks. They had heard evidence, testimony, and arguments. And now, they were ready to decide. They did not know that the man they were judging had already died. They did not know that while they deliberated. A verdict was about to land in a room where no one on trial was still alive to hear it. The case they were deciding was 48 years old. It began with a borrowed pair of boots, a white bicycle, and a young woman riding toward a stable to see her horse. If cases like this should not be forgotten, stay with me and consider joining this channel for more respectful cold case stories. Jody Loomis was 20 years old in the summer of 1972. She lived with her family in Bothell, Washington, a quiet community north of Seattle, surrounded by trees and winding roads. Jody had a younger sister named Jana, who was 12 at the time. She had an older brother named John, who was 27. She had a horse named Saudi. And she had a routine she loved, riding her bicycle to the stable, spending time with her horse, and coming home again. She was not a case file. She was not a victim number. She was a young woman with a simple plan for a Wednesday afternoon. On August 23, 1972, Jody got ready to go to the stable. Before she left, she borrowed a pair of boots from her younger sister, Jana. They were the kind of boots people called waffle stompers back then, sturdy, with a thick, textured sole. Jody laced them up and walked out with her white 10-speed bicycle. She had a clear route. She would ride north on North Road to 164th Street Southeast, then east toward the Bothell-Everett Highway, and from there up toward Penny Creek Road, which today is called Mill Creek Road. It was a familiar path. She had made this trip before. At around 5 o'clock that afternoon, Jody was seen crossing the highway and riding uphill on Penny Creek Road. That sighting is the last confirmed moment anyone reported seeing her alive. 30 minutes later, 2 people found her in a wooded area near that same road. She had been disrobed. She had been shot in the head. One of Jana's boots was untied. Her glasses were not sitting right on her face. The 2 people who found her did not wait for help to arrive. They transported Jody themselves to Stevens Memorial Hospital in Edmonds. According to the official Snohomish County Sheriff's Office release, she was pronounced dead at the hospital. She had gone to see her horse. She never came home. Deputies investigated in the days and weeks that followed. They looked at local men. They looked at possible connections. One secondary account mentions a ranch owner who had behaved inappropriately toward Jody and a tenant who had been nearby. But no physical evidence tied any of those men to what happened to Jody in those woods. Without evidence, investigators could not move forward. The case did not close. But it went quiet. And it stayed quiet for a long time. The 1970s became the 1980s. The 80s became the 90s. Jody's family continued to live with the absence of answers. John Loomis grew older, carrying what had happened to his sister. Jana grew up knowing her boots had been the last thing Jody wore. Saudi, the horse, could not testify to what he had lost that afternoon. The case entered the category that investigators dread and families fear most: a cold case. A file that stays open but receives no new entries. A name that does not leave the system, but also does not move. Then, in 2005, something changed. A cold case detective named Jim Scharf reopened the investigation. He went back to the evidence that had been preserved from 1972. And among that evidence were Jody's boots, Jana's boots, the ones she had lent her sister that morning. A technician at the Washington State Crime Laboratory examined one of the boots. What they found was small, microscopic, a tiny biological trace on the surface of the boot, small enough that it had gone unnoticed for 33 years. But it was there, and it was enough to develop a DNA profile. That profile was entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database, maintained by the FBI. CODIS is where DNA profiles from crime scenes are compared automatically against profiles from convicted offenders. If there is a match, investigators know almost immediately. If there is no match, the profile waits, sometimes for years, sometimes longer. Jody's profile waited. It found no match in CODIS. So the case went quiet again. The profile sat in the system. The boot sat in storage. The file stayed open. And another decade passed. But the world of forensic science was not standing still. In the years after 2005, a new kind of investigation became possible. It was called forensic genetic genealogy. It worked differently from CODIS. Instead of matching a crime scene DNA profile against a database of convicted offenders, it used a different kind of database entirely, one filled with people who had voluntarily submitted their own DNA to trace their family trees. Here is how it works in simple terms. When you send your DNA to a consumer genealogy company, your profile is added to a shared database. You are then shown possible relatives, cousins, second cousins, distant family members who also submitted their DNA. These shared segments of genetic material can stretch across generations and across branches of a family. If a crime scene DNA profile is added to the same database, and if that unknown DNA shares segments with people already in the system, genealogists can begin building a family tree. They can work backward and forward through generations, through birth and death records, through census information and marriage filings, until they narrow down a group of possible people who share the same DNA ancestry as the unknown profile. It is slow, careful, detailed work. And it is not guesswork. It is mathematics applied to family history. In 2018, investigators converted Jody's crime scene DNA profile into a format compatible with GEDmatch, a public genealogy database where users can upload their own DNA results for family tree comparisons. A genealogist named Deb Stone assisted with the investigation, along with the forensic genetics company Parabon Nanolabs. The family tree work began. Investigators identified distant relatives connected to the unknown profile. They built branches, traced lines, eliminated possibilities, and followed the genetic evidence wherever it led. After months of work, according to the probable cause materials reported by ABC News, the investigation pointed toward one family, the Miller family. And within that family, the search narrowed further. Investigators believed the unknown DNA likely belonged to one of 6 brothers. Now they needed to know which one. Investigators focused on Terrence Miller, known as Terry. According to available reporting, Miller had reportedly lived approximately 5 miles from the crime scene in 1972. He was 33 years old that summer. By 2018, he was 77. Investigators needed a direct DNA sample to confirm whether Miller's DNA matched the profile from Jody's boot. They could not simply ask him. They needed something he had voluntarily discarded, something that would carry his DNA without requiring a warrant for a body sample. So, they followed him. On August 29, 2018, investigators followed Terrence Miller to a casino. They watched him. And when he was done, he discarded a coffee cup in a trash can and walked away. Investigators recovered that cup. The Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory tested the DNA from the discarded cup against the DNA profile recovered from the evidence on Jody's boot. It matched. The man who had thrown away that coffee cup and walked out of a casino carried the same DNA profile that had been waiting on a boot in a storage unit for 46 years. In November 2018, 2 undercover detectives visited Miller's home in Edmonds, where he and his wife operated a ceramic shop from their garage. During that visit, investigators reportedly noticed a newspaper article in the garage about genetic genealogy being used to solve another local murder. Prosecutors would later suggest this indicated Miller may have been aware of the technique and following the news about it. But this was an inference, not a proven fact. On April 10, 2019, at approximately 10:30 in the morning, Terrence Miller was arrested at his home. He was 77 years old. He was taken into custody without incident. The next day, the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office made a public announcement. Terrence Miller had been charged with first-degree premeditated murder in the 1972 killing of Jody Loomis. He was held on $1 million bail. John Loomis, Jody's brother, was now in his mid-70s. He had been 27 years old when his sister was killed. He had waited 46 years for this moment. Miller did not confess. He pleaded not guilty. He would go to trial. The trial began in October 2020. The prosecution built its case around the DNA, the genetic genealogy investigation, the discarded coffee cup, the match between Miller's DNA and the biological trace recovered from Jody's boot, and Miller's reported proximity to the crime scene in 1972. Prosecutors argued that the combined weight of the evidence proved, beyond a reasonable doubt, that Terrence Miller had killed Jody Loomis. The defense pushed back on every piece of it. Miller's attorney, Laura Martin, argued that the DNA analysis had been improperly conducted. She raised concerns about laboratory contamination and said an analyst had contaminated the boots with his own DNA during examination. She argued that critical evidence had been lost or destroyed over the decades, and that some evidence had gone unaccounted for during substantial periods of time. She argued that DNA found on the outside of a boot did not, by itself, prove how it got there or who had committed the murder. Miller maintained his innocence throughout. The jury heard everything. 2 weeks of testimony, scientific explanations of DNA profiling and genetic genealogy, prosecution witnesses, defense experts, cross-examinations. They heard the prosecution's argument and the defense's counter-argument. And then, in November 2020, they were sent to deliberate. What happened next is one of the most extraordinary moments in the history of cold case justice. While the jury was deliberating inside the courthouse, Terrence Miller was not there. He had been free on his $1 million bond during the trial, and sometime during deliberations, a family member found him dead at his home in Edmonds. The Snohomish County medical examiner later confirmed that Miller had died by suicide. The jurors continued deliberating. No one told them. Later that same day, the jury returned to the courtroom. They announced their verdict. Guilty. Guilty of first-degree murder. They had found Terrence Miller guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And then they went home, not knowing that the man they had convicted was already gone. When the news became public, prosecutors addressed it directly. Craig Matheson, the prosecutor in the case, said that Miller's absence did not diminish the verdict. A judge later signed an order formally affirming that Miller had been found guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. There was no sentencing. There was no prison. Miller had died before any of that could occur. John Loomis learned the outcome by watching the verdict live-streamed. He said he had wanted to see Miller go to prison. He described the outcome as justice that was almost done. Not completely. Not in the way he had hoped. But almost. For Jana, the sister who had lent Jody those boots on an ordinary Wednesday morning in 1972, there was at least this. A name. A face. A verdict. A pair of boots sat in a storage unit for more than 30 years before anyone looked at them carefully enough to find what they were holding. A biological trace too small to see, too small to matter for decades had survived. It had survived the years and the storage conditions and the passage of time. And it had waited. Forensic science changed around it. Genealogy databases grew. Investigators reopened the file. A genealogist built a family tree one branch at a time. A detective followed a man to a casino and waited for him to throw away a cup. And 48 years after Jody Loomis rode her bicycle toward a stable to see a horse named Saudi, a jury said what happened to her was murder in the first degree. She had borrowed her sister's boots that morning. She had a plan. She had people waiting for her. She had a life beyond what happened in those woods. The boots remembered. And eventually, so did the law.